as we're here talking, right this minute, are we registering now? I think it is, yeah. I simply want to say I'm seated here at the home of E.B. Sledge, Sledgehammer. And this is in Montevallo. I like him to describe it, Alabama. It's a very graciously appointed house, fireplace. He and his wife, Jean, and sons have lived here. But this is E.B. Sledge himself is very gentle of manner. But I didn't think that in reading his book at first, you see. He wrote a book. But before that, there's a plaque on the wall. And it has the patch, 1st Marine Division, the familiar patch, this Guadalcanal, presented to Eugene B. Sledge. And it reads, "We, the men of K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Regiment, 1st Marine Division, do hereby proudly bestow," by the way, CO for company, BN for battalion, REG for regiment, "do hereby proudly bestow this testimonial in expression of our great admiration and heartfelt appreciation to one extraordinary Marine who has honored his comrades in arms by unveiling to the world their exploits and heroism in his authorship of With the Old Breed at Peleliu and Okinawa. God love you, Sledgehammer, 1982. So I was thinking, Sledge, I know you're called Sledge, but here you are, slim of build, gentle. You are professor of what at the University of Montevallo?
Well, I'm a biology professor, and I teach several courses: evolution, comparative anatomy, and ornithology, and history and philosophy of science. My main interest is ornithology, bird study. I've been interested in birds since I was a kid, and that's my main interest.
Where was that?
And I grew up in Mobile, Alabama.
Interested in birds, and so I think of you and World War II and the Marine. I say World War II to you, because your world then has been, if I didn't know about your book and your exploits, I'd say this gentle, non-violent being. That's about a good description, isn't it?
What do you mean? You think there's an irony there?
I don't know. I was asking. I would describe you as.
I said.
Is that a good description?
Well, I've never been put in jail for breaking the peace, anything like that. I suppose you'd call me nonviolent.
Yeah. Gentle.
Well, I hope so.
Well, what did you say when you said just then, do I see an irony in it?
Well, in the fact that I'm interested in birds and biological science and was a combat Marine on the front lines. It's amazing stuff. You know, people tend to think of birds and bird watchers as being sort of, you know, is not quite macho, you know, and so forth. Because I think the ridiculous thing is there was nothing macho about the war at all. We were just a bunch of scared kids who had to do a job, and the reason we did it was because we were trained properly and we were patriotic. And that, I mean, you know, to me, there's no. People tell me, you know, well, you don't look or act like an ex-Marine, and I say, well, how's an ex-Marine supposed to act? And they have some Hollywood stereotype, you know. But the guys in my outfit, well, I think history proves were the best, or some of the best. They were. All the 6 Marine divisions were good, but there were some real old timers in my company, from stretching way back to Nicaragua and that sort of thing. And we were just a bunch of kids that volunteered and went in, and because it was a total war, and these guys, their spirit rubbed off on us. And what we were in it for was to get it over with so we could get back home and then do what we wanted to do and lead our lives.
You said a bunch of scared kids. You said young kids.
Well, yeah, I was 19, and I think that the average age of In the First Marine Division, when I went into it, it had been the Guadalcanal campaign and the Cape Gloucester campaign, and then I went into it as a replacement.
We're talking about what years roughly now?
Well, I went in the First Division in June of 1944. I had been through boot camp and infantry training, of course, prior to that. I went into it overseas. It was overseas. It just had come off of Cape Gloucester. And the average age, I think, or 80% of the division was not 21 years old yet. So we were, compared to Army combat units, generally we were much younger.
Younger. You were 19.
Yeah.
You said of a replacement division.
No, I was a replacement in the division. See, because they, after each campaign, they had to bring in replacements to make up for the casualties. And I went into my company.
Which were pretty heavy.
Well, they were heavy at Guadalcanal and not so heavy at Cape Gloucester. But then I went in as a replacement, and some of the Guadalcanal men rotated home, and then we hit Peleliu and were there 30 days, and my company had 65% casualties. Some of them had more casualties than mine did, but see, I think there's a point that I think you and I talked about it earlier, that there are really, to me, in a sense, there were two different wars, not just different theaters, but there was the war of the guy on the front lines, who was, and that's what I just happened to have been, and my unit was one of those types, and we were on the front lines, and you didn't come off the front lines until your unit got relieved, or until you got killed or wounded, and then there were all these support personnel who were necessary behind us. But in the public eye, everybody was in the service. He was in the war zone and all this. And one writer has shown that, one historian has shown that in the Pacific, for every one man on the front lines, every rifleman, and I was a rifleman and also a light infantry mortarman, which was just firing right over the lines. But for every one man on the line in the Pacific, there were 19 people in support positions. Mm-hmm. So you see, their view of the war was different from my view. And the journalists and the writers, in my view, very, very seldom give you the perspective of the man who was the participant on the line and had to put his life on the line day after day after day, to the point of utter hopelessness. And this is the way it was for us. And the only thing that kept you going was your faith in your buddies, and that, you see, it was a strong Marine tradition. And I don't know about the other services, so I can't say, and I don't want to appear to be critical of them. But one of the strongest motivating factors we had in our training was you can't let another Marine down. You just can't let your buddy down. And it wasn't just a case of friendship. It was a case of, if this guy's a Marine, he is a guy that you can depend on, and he can depend on you. And so I've had fellows from other branches of the service write me and say, you didn't mention in your book, you didn't mention self-inflicted wounds. I saw this in Europe. And, well, I never heard of it. I must admit, there were plenty of times that I wished I could have gotten $1 million wound, and I thought about maybe shooting a toe off or something like that, to be perfectly honest. But it was not the worst thing. What was worse than death was the indignation of your buddies that you didn't measure up to what they were doing, and you couldn't let them down. And
this was even beyond this thing you're talking about. This not letting your buddy down and not losing your buddy's respect was perhaps even stronger than flag and country.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's true, because in essence, when it seems to, in my opinion, after you'd been in combat, a matter of, maybe just a few days, and at Peleliu, of course, it was 30 days and 30 nights, because with the Japanese, it was all night long, infiltrating the lines and slipping up and throwing grenades and trying to come running in, with a bayonet or a saber or something. And although they did not put any of those stupid bonsai charges on us at Peleliu, they pretty much stayed back in the caves and all. But they were active all night, and so it was, all they could sleep was, your buddy would try to get a little cat nap, and you'd stay on watch, and then you'd switch off. And so it went on day in and day out, and nobody really talked about patriotism after. I mean, it was a matter of just simple survival, and the only way you could get it over with was to kill them off before they killed you off. And so patriotism probably is what motivated many of us to enlist, but when you get down to the real elemental aspects of it, what it was all about was just a matter of survival. Yeah. And the war that I knew was, it was totally savage and without quarter. I mean, there was no, we never took prisoners unless an officer made us take them.
Really?
Yeah, because, because the hatred was so intense. Because you see, the Japanese fought by a code which they thought was right, which was the code of Bushido.
Bushido?
Yeah, Bushido.
Meaning?
Code of the warrior.
Uh-huh.
And they would reach perfection through perfecting the art of being a warrior, you see. And so to them, it was no surrender. And this was, the papers talk about no surrender and this, that, and the other, but you don't really comprehend it until you get out there and fight people who are faced with an absolutely hopeless situation, and you've got them cornered, but they will not give up.
And then, of course, there was this feeling here, these young kids, obviously unsophisticated, naive young kids who join the Marines, they're also scared. At the same time, they won't let their buddy down. Something happens to them and their attitude toward the others, the Japanese. They develop a sort of hatred.
You mean the Japanese?
No, I'm talking about the American kids.
Oh, yeah, well, of course, if you tried to help wounded Japanese, they usually responded by detonating one of their grenades and would kill themselves, which is typically what they would try to do to prevent being captured, was to kill themselves if they were
because capture was disgrace.
Disgrace to them, yeah. And to us, of course, it was impossible because we all knew what had happened at Bataan. So it was a no quarter savage kind of thing. And you develop an attitude toward these people. I've heard of where you had absolutely no mercy on them, and they had no mercy on us. And I must admit that at first, at Peleliu, for instance, the first time I was really close enough to any of them to see them and see their faces when they got hit and all that, because a lot of my buddies had been hit by that time, but it really bothered me. And the first time I had to see a Japanese get hit at first, and the first time I saw some of the guys field stripping them, as the term went, where you went through the packs and the pockets for souvenirs and stuff, and the guys would drag them around just like a carcass, and getting souvenirs off of them. And I was just horrified. I was just amazed. These guys, they'd been human beings, and yeah, my buddies were, because these buddies were veterans, you see, and I was a greenhorn, one of the greenhorns, and recruits, so to speak, but it didn't take you long to overcome that, because after a while, I guess you could say the veneer of civilization sort of wore pretty thin. Because the fatigue and the stress, and I hear people talk about, well, they like this in athletics or that type of excitement in hunting and this, that, and the other, because the old adrenaline is flowing. Well, after the adrenaline flows about a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's been shown biologically that you become physiologically exhausted. Just simply from being
Yeah.
excited and, you might say, revved up for so long. And of course, Okinawa was, it lasted 82 days.
You were in Okinawa, too.
Yeah, Peleliu and Okinawa.
Yeah.
And at Okinawa, my company had over 100% casualties, and they brought replacements in, and the old guys would get hit. Some of the new guys got hit, and so forth. But it didn't take you long. This attitude of hatred toward the Japanese was not a sort of a false macho type thing that we you might say, got from the veterans, or were trying to act tough, anything like that. It was just a natural feeling that developed. Because, I mean, this was it seems to me, it was as elemental a matter of literally fighting for survival as anything could be. Because my brother was in Europe, and he was decorated. He was in a tank outfit attached to the 2nd Infantry Division, which was a very outstanding infantry division in the Army. And he was wounded 3 times. He was in the Battle of the Bulge and all this. But he said typically when things were hopeless for the Germans, they surrendered.
So it was different, was it not? In other words, there was a different attitude toward the Germans than there was toward the Japanese.
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen guys shoot Japanese wounded when it really was not necessary. And knock gold teeth out of their mouths, because most of them had gold teeth, you know. I remember one time the first time at Peleliu, I thought, well, I ought to collect some gold teeth, because one of my buddies he carried a bunch of them in a sock, and what you did was you took your K-bars. Here's the one I carried through the war.
K-bar.
Yeah, K-bar, fighting knife.
This is called K-bar.
And it has a 7-inch blade.
Oh, wow.
And I
K-bar, because
that's the company that made it.
Yeah.
And and
bar is has initials for something.
BAR.
Yeah.
Browning automatic rifle. But this
That's it. Yeah.
But this is the name of the knife.
Yeah, knife. Yeah.
But we all had these, and at night you typically slept with it like this, you know, because they would try to creep around the foxholes and all. But the way they extracted a gold tooth was to put the tip of the blade on the base of the tooth of the dead Japanese, and I've seen guys do it to wounded ones.
To wounded ones.
Yeah, that
While
couldn't
still alive.
they couldn't resist. Yeah, you know, and put the tip of the blade on the base of the tooth and hit the the hilt of the knife to knock it loose. And
so you said.
I mean, this sounds unreal. How could American boys do that? They could do it because they'd been reduced to savagery by a situation that was a matter of life or death for the Japanese and for us. And I saw Lindbergh made a trip to the Philippines, and he interviewed some Americans, and he was horrified at the way the American GIs, the Army GIs, the infantrymen, talked about the Japanese, you know, and the boys sounded so brutal and all. Well, you know, I admire Colonel Lindbergh for his idealism, and he says, we're fighting for democracy, and these men talk like they're savages or something. He didn't say savages, but that's what we were. This is what you were reduced to in order to survive.
Even you, at that one time, you said.
Well, yeah, I was going to get some gold teeth.
Even at that very beginning, yeah.
At Peleliu, there was this Jap machine gun squad that had been knocked out by my company, and the nips, the ammo carriers and all lying around, and I went up with my K-bar and I leaned down to, as the troops used to say, make the extraction in the prescribed manner, and this we had Navy medical corpsmen as hospital, you know, medics, the Army called Army medical people, but our Navy medical corpsmen were just phenomenal guys. They were wonderful, and just, oh my God, they were just so dedicated, and they had a terrific casualty rate. But anyway, this boy's name was Kent Caswell, and bless his soul, he's dead now. He died a few years ago, but he was from Texas, and Doc Caswell said, Sledgehammer, what are you going to do? And I said, Doc, I'm going to get me some gold teeth. And he said, well, now, you don't want to do that. Don't do that. And I said, well, all the other guys are doing it, you know. And, hell, I've been cutting insignias off their collars for souvenirs and this kind of thing. And he says, but don't take the gold teeth. What would your folks think? I said, well, gosh, Doc, my dad is a medical doctor back in Mobile. He might think it's interesting, if I had some Jap gold teeth, And he said, oh, Sledgehammer, you don't want to do that. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because of the germs. You might get germs from it. And I said, well, I hadn't thought of that, Doc. Well, I hadn't had any biology at the time. And in retrospect, I realized that Kent Caswell wasn't worried about germs. He just didn't want to see me do that. Because, it was just another step, you might say, toward just abandoning all concepts of decency. That
You see, what's great about you, Sledgehammer.
No.
No.
It's the way it was.
No, what's moving about you is that you see the horror of it, of which you were part of, the young soldier, young Marine, and the other guys who were decent kids. But something that you point, one kid shooting pebbles into the skull.
Oh, yeah, the Jap machine gunner. Water had fallen into the skull.
And casually doing what? What was he doing?
Well, this Jap machine gunner was squatting down on the ground behind his heavy machine gun, and one of our Browning automatic riflemen had killed him and just took the top of his skull off with a blast of rifle fire, and then killed the rest of the Jap ammo carriers. And it rained that night, and this Jap gunner didn't fall over. The other ammo carriers were laid out on the ground, and so was the assistant gunner. But some odd reason, the gunner was sitting bolt upright behind the machine gun. You sat flat on your fanny with those things, and it put the feet forward, and it had button triggers and two handles to aim it with. And his arms were down at his side because, of course, he was dead. But his eyes were wide open, and he was looking right down the barrel, just like he was aiming the machine gun. The top of his head was gone, and it had rained that night, and rain had collected inside of his skull. And one of my buddies, we were sitting there on our helmets waiting to be pulled out off this little, this was actually a little small island off the coast of Peleliu that my battalion had hit. And we'd run into heavy resistance there, although the history books say it was light. That was because it was written by someone who wasn't up there. But anyway, we were waiting for an Army infantry battalion that was going to relieve us. And we were just sitting around. It was fairly quiet. We were just sitting around waiting for the Army guys to come up and relieve us, and sitting on our helmets. And they made a great bucket seat, And this buddy of mine, I noticed he was just flipping chunks of coral, little chunks of coral. And he was sitting about 3 feet away from this dead gunner, and the dead Japanese laying all in amongst us. And he was trying to flip the little bits of pebble into the skull. And every time he'd get one in there, there'd be a little splash. It reminded me of a child throwing pebbles into a puddle, or something. And it's just so unreal. And of course, much of what it seems to me, much of what I experienced, and my buddies too, it was nothing unique about me, but what we experienced, much of it is never written about because the guys, in most cases, the people who wrote came up to the front lines and spent a little while, and as anybody with any sense would, left as soon as they could. Because the chances of not getting hit was so slim. That is, the 2 battles I was in. And
I was thinking, gee, again, we come back to these young, ordinary, decent young kids who were very heroic, helping their buddies, and yet that war, that particular kind, does something. Or the kid who wanted to shoot the Japanese soldier's penis off.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that amazed me, in retrospect, is that it was so unreal, and of course you had all kinds of people come back from the service who had seen varying degrees of combat. People wouldn't believe most of that because it's just too bizarre. And for instance, there's a section in With the Old Breed in which I describe when our company was on a hill called Half Moon Hill at Okinawa. It was right next to Sugarloaf Hill, which the 6th Marine Division had taken. And we were on Half Moon Hill about 10 days, I guess, and the Japs were on the other side of it. And every night they'd try to come through the lines, and we'd have these grenade fights with them. They'd jump into foxholes and all this kind of stuff. We were under constant artillery and mortar fire, and there were no helicopters, of course, so our wounded had to be taken out probably 2 miles through the mud, and the dead couldn't be removed, and there were dead Japs there. We'd throw mud over them, and then the shells would come in and blow that off and blow them apart, and the maggots were just in the mud like, like you were in some piece of rotten, corruption out there somewhere, or compost pile. Writers don't write about this, the journalists and so forth, because nobody came up there who didn't have to be there.
Also that it was different. That the Pacific theater, the European theater, with attitudes toward the antagonist was different. That they were considered different than the Germans.
I think that's true, and I've heard many guys who fought in Europe say that the Germans were damn good soldiers, and we hated the hell out of having to fight them, and this, that, and the other. But when they surrendered, sometimes you'd run into one who spoke English, and they were guys just like us.
Mm-hmm.
But with the Japanese, it was not that way. I don't really know, but about at Peleliu, I think, as I recall, my company took 2 prisoners. At Okinawa, we took about 5. Now, and you read accounts of so many prisoners taken on the Pacific battlefields. Well, when those prisoners, when they got them back and interrogated them, they found that many of them were Oriental laborers. They were not Japanese soldiers in most cases. And we had the orders not to, to kill the wounded and to try to take prisoners, because if they surrendered, they'd give you all the information possible, but the guys just, the feeling was so strong that now you see, someone who was not in a frontline company, maybe he would say, well, I didn't feel that way. Well, maybe he didn't, because maybe he could get a cup of coffee when he wanted it, and he could take a shower when he wanted it. He wasn't out there living like an animal or a savage, and knew that he had to stay up there until he got hit or killed, or until all of the enemy was done away with.
Yeah. That drill instructor way back, even in the very beginning in boot camp.
Well, Terry Doherty, bless his heart, he just died about
But I mean, what did he say? The drill instructor would say they were different, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Well, he'd tell us, he'd say, you guys, you're not going to Europe to fight. You're going to the Pacific, and you better learn how to use this K-bar, because I guarantee you, either you or the guy next to you, before the war's over, you're going to be involved in a hand-to-hand fight with a K-bar. And in my case, I personally never was, because fortunately my buddy Snafu Shelton, old Merrill Shelton from Louisiana, either one of the other of us always managed to shoot those at night that got in very, very close. But sometimes, just out of sheer fatigue, they would get close enough, and the guys wouldn't be able to see them or hear them until they jumped in, and then it was the K-bar.
What was that phrase? You both have a phrase. You're not going Asiatic on me. Going Asiatic.
Yeah, well, Asiatic is an old Marine term that people, you might say, define it different ways, but basically what it meant was you had just simply been in the Asian theater. Well, it was a pre-war term too. And a Marine had been on a far eastern station so long that he began to just kind of think differently from other people. He just came kind of sort of mentally detached, from the way other people felt. And the thing that, of all the things to me that was so difficult to get over, other than the horror of it and the loss of my buddies and all, about the war, was to come home and find people who complained about trivia and complained about things that you'd want to say, well, my God, you can go get a pair of dry socks on anytime you want to. You're not being shelled or shot at, and what are you complaining about? That was one of the hardest things over the years to really learn to live with. That everybody hadn't had it the same way we had. But by the same token, as my dad told me, don't ever feel sorry for yourself because your outfit had it rough, as rough or rougher than anybody other than the prisoners of the Japs, but you survived, so don't feel sorry for
You were
yourself.
what of how many of your original company?
Well, at Peleliu we had 65% casualties. In Okinawa we had over 100%. I guess in the two campaigns, the gunny sergeant Hank Boys and I counted it up, and there were about 10 of us that never got a scratch, and I never missed a day of
That's
combat.
10 out of how many, would you say?
Well, you see, the company originally had 235 in it, but some went home after Peleliu, Guadalcanal veterans, and then some of the wounded came back to the company, and then you see at Okinawa, the company hit the beach with 235 men, and the landing was unopposed there, but we landed with 235 men, but then we got 250 replacements over they just kept feeding the new men into the company, and so it would be impossible to figure what the percentages were.
Obviously very few survived.
I mean, my luck was just almost unreal.
I was thinking, certain ones are more affected than others. I mean, more brutalized. War brutalizes. Because you're describing a scene in Okinawa, and that old woman, the Okinawa woman, and the young kid did it. She wanted what? Her suffering was so great.
Yeah, apparently she was in this little hut, and had made the breakthrough there, and had broken through the Nahashuri line, it was called, the main Japanese defense line of defended ridges on the southern end, and we're moving forward there, and I had Snafu and I, he was the gun and I was the assistant gun on this light infantry mortar, but when we acted as riflemen, well, we swapped off with the Tommy gun, and he had a carbine, I had the Tommy, or we'd switch them off. And I had the Tommy gun, Thompson submachine gun, and I went to check this little house out. It was some of the little houses had grass thatched, like they used in medieval Europe, thatched roofs on Okinawa. Some of them had tile roof. Now, this small little house, and there was this old Okinawan woman in there, and she held out her hands like that, and many of the older Okinawans had an hourglass-shaped figure tattooed on the back of the hand, and apparently this meant that they were of Okinawan heritage, and she said, "No Nipponese," which meant she was not Japanese. Well, of course, we hadn't run into any Japanese civilians. We had only encountered Okinawan civilians. And she opened her kimono and pointed down to the area just at the lower part of her abdominal region on one side, and pointed with her finger, and there was this terrible healed up wound down there. And you could see that gangrene had set in, and she was sitting just inside the door. And you could see that gangrene had set in, and she was sitting just inside the door, and there was enough daylight for me to see that wound, and you could see the gangrene there and everything, and I knew that it was infected, and I knew enough to know that it was probably gotten into the body cavity, and that's peritonitis sets in a case like that, and she probably didn't have a chance to survive. And she obviously was in terrible pain. She'd probably gotten caught in the artillery fire between the Japanese and the American forces is probably what injured her, or maybe an airstrike. And the wound was maybe a week or more old. But she just very gently reached around and got the muzzle of my Tommy gun and moved it around to her forehead, and then motioned with her other hand for me to pull the trigger. And I just jerked it away and motioned no to her, and called a corpsman over there. I said, "Hey, Doc, there's an old gook woman." This is what we call all the natives in the Pacific. "There's an old gook woman over here that's got a bad wound. Come check out and see if you can do anything." So he said, "Okay, Sledgehammer." So he came running over there, and then by that time, one of the he put a dressing on it, and he called for to send word to the Riv to have somebody evacuate the old woman. And when we weren't under any fire or anything at that particular time, so they said, some of the guys back there in the back said, "Okay, we'll come get her." And so this medical corpsman and I started moving on out. The sergeant said, "Come on, Sledgehammer, let's go." So I started moving out, and we got I guess maybe, I don't know how far from the hut, it wasn't very far, and we heard a rifle shot ring out. And, of course, you recognize the different weapons. You had to learn to do that in a hurry, you know. And this Coleman and I both went down into a crouch, and I said, that was an M1, wasn't it? You know, M1 ground rifle.
Which is a more violent one, isn't it? An M1.
Yeah, violent. What do you mean?
No, I mean, M1 is... Oh, then you knew it was an American gun.
Yeah, that's right. I knew it was an American rifle. You know, it was an American rifle. So we knew that a Marine had fired a shot. See, because we could recognize the Japanese Arisaka rifle when it went off. And I said, that was an M1. And the Coleman said, it sure was. And we looked back toward the hut and thought, my God, you know, maybe there was a sniper in there that we didn't see. And maybe that old woman was acting as a front for him or something. Well, here comes one of the guys in the company walking out, checking safety on his rifle. And we went back over there and said, I said, was there a nip in that hut? And he said, no, there was just an old gook woman in there. And she wanted me to put her out of her misery so she could join her ancestors, I guess. And so I obliged her. And I just blew my top. I said, you son of a bitch, they didn't send us out here to kill old women. They sent us out here to fight the Japs. And he started making all these excuses, you know, and all this. And I said, and the Coleman jumped in and started reaming him out. And about that time, a sergeant came up and said, what the hell's going on, you guys? And so we told him. And he said, okay, you guys move out. So we went on, and I don't know what was ever done about it, whether there was any disciplinary action or what. But, you know, just the utter... I mean, that shocked most of the guys I knew. And I told this guy, I said, you know, he was back in company headquarters, which was, considering the overall picture, was pretty far forward, you know. I mean, he was no more, most of the time, no more than maybe 50 yards behind the front line. I said, my God, if you want to kill somebody and shoot somebody, you come up here with us and stay with us. Don't you stay back in the company CP.
What is it, then, that made you behave differently, say, from this guy? I mean, what? Now we come to little things, individual difference, don't we? Something you would never dream of doing, he did. You know, something he wasn't horrified by, you were horrified by. But I guess individuals were different there too, I suppose.
Well, I guess so, because he was a nice, I mean, he was a good buddy, and he was a nice guy, and I liked him.
That's what I'm talking about. Now, something... These were all pretty good kids, weren't
they? Oh,
they?
hell yeah.
Sure, now and then you find a sadist or a crazy nut.
Yeah, that's
you mentioned
true.
a certain nut there,
but this, I mean...
But generally speaking, these are just ordinary kids.
Well, they were ordinary in a sense. They were, in a sense, like the boy next door. But in a sense, to me, they were extraordinary because our outfit was fantastic. I mean, most of them didn't wait to be drafted. They volunteered, and they weren't just a bunch of hot-head crazy kids. They joined up because they wanted to belong to what was the best, and I think that's what our
No, I mean what makes them these good kids, decent and patriotic. What makes them after a time do and accept these horrible things, war itself. Is what I mean.
Well, I don't know. I mean, nobody knows the answer to that, but I think most people have no concept of what war is really like at the elemental level of the man who's out there looking at the enemy over the sights of a rifle. And I mean, I don't mean this movie macho business of dashing in for an exciting 24-hour raid and all that stuff. I'm talking about day after day after day being pounded with artillery, being pounded with mortars, seeing guys get killed that you literally love these guys, you're so close to them, and they have risked their lives for you and vice versa. And because what you're trying to do is survive until it's over. And as to why one individual would act differently from another, I don't really know. You see, this guy was a newer replacement than I was already a veteran of Peleliu when this happened, and he had come in just before Okinawa. But there was another incident where that I always thought was rather strange from the standpoint of the effects of the war on people. And I think it brought out how it was fighting the Japanese. we had the campaign was almost over at Okinawa, and this we ran it well on a patrol in this fairly quiet area, and the done rain had finally stopped. It rained just torrential rains for about 2 weeks, and we'd finally dried out. Literally bailed our foxholes out. I mean, they would literally fill up with water if you didn't bail them out. And if you got outside of them, you got hit or killed from shell fire. But anyway, we ran across this place that had been apparently a field hospital. And one of my buddies found this emaciated, wounded Japanese soldier lying in this bunk just inside. But you wouldn't dare go in beyond where the daylight was because there might be snipers in there. Now at Peleliu, the caves were all in coral ridges, but at Okinawa it was clay. There was some rock, but this was a clay ridge, and it was reinforced with beams of wood and concrete. This cave was. And so this buddy of mine, he had a pistol and a .45 automatic, and he saw that the Jap apparently didn't have on anything but a G-string, and was just looked like he didn't maybe weigh over at least maybe 90 or 100 pounds, you know. He lost somebody. He was pitiful. He apparently had been wounded in the chest or something. But anyway, and when the Japs moved out, they'd left him behind. And this buddy of mine picked him up and carried him out, and everything was muddy out there. There was no place to put him except just lay him down on the mud. So he laid him down on the mud, and this Jap was very quiet and docile. He acted like he wasn't going to hurt anybody. And so John, this boy, laid him down out there, and we were all sitting off there about, I guess, 20, 30 feet, and sitting on our helmets, you know, waiting for a corpsman to come up and check this Jap wounded out, because information might be able to be obtained from him by the intelligence section. And so John was looking around. He was just sort of daydreaming, and this wounded Jap was lying there on the ground. We figured he couldn't get up. And the Japanese grenade, an incident of his. See how ours had
there it is.
Yeah, well, now, this is an American grenade. You see, he had to pull the pin, and then let that spoon fly off, or when you threw it, the spoon flew off, and you had a cap, a hammer that hit the cap. Well, the Japanese grenade was different. You pulled the pin on it, and then you had to hit it on something hard to pop the cap, to set the powder train. And they typically would hit it on the rifle stock, or I've seen them hit it on the helmet. Well, we looked over there, and here was this wounded Japanese. He had reached down in his G-string. He had a grenade out. He jerked the pin out of it, and he didn't have anything to hit it on, so he was hitting it on his fist to try to pop the cap, and then he was going to literally, well, it would have made hamburger meat out of both him and John, you see. And so we yelled over there and said, "Look out there, buddy. That nip's got a grenade." And John looked down there at him and said, "Well, you son of a bitch, if that's the way you feel about it." So he just pulled his .45 out and shot him right between the eyes. And so then the corpsman came up, and a lieutenant came up and said, "Where's this wounded nip?" And we said, "Well, he's dead now. He's over." And he said, "Well, who shot him and why? And did he surrender?" And we said, "Yes, sir, but he didn't say so on the front lines. Officers had code names." We said, "Yeah, he surrendered, but he tried to pull a grenade on John, so John shot him." But now, see, here was this guy who had compassion enough to go in and get this Japanese out of the bunk where he was right inside the cave and bring him out there to try to get medical help for him. And then the reaction of the Japanese soldier was to try to pull a grenade to kill them both, he said. Well, so my point is, this is what we were up against.
Right. Gee, you said there were very few. We know in Europe there were a great many self-inflicted wounds, had to be. You say in the Asiatic theater?
Well, now, I don't know about the Asiatic theater. I'm talking about in my outfit. I'm not making any general statements, but I don't know of any. I've talked to some of the guys that survived since the war, and they laugh about the fact that, you know, when there would be heavy fire, sometimes they'd want to stick one finger up, maybe it would get hit, you know, so they could get evacuated. But there was always that stigma of not letting your buddies down.
That's the thing, yeah.
And
isn't that interesting? That happened. A guy told me about this in European theater too. He was being honored. He says, "Oh, they should know. I wanted to do it, but I just couldn't let my buddies down."
Yeah, yeah.
Let me turn this over. This is beautiful.
Well, I don't know what you.
It's your story.
Well, but I don't want to ramble on.
No. I like this rambling. This is very moving. We almost have what I'm looking for. But I want your reflections. Because here you are, we're sitting here watching this area, hillside here, this gentle thing. You said, in the very beginning, you said, do you think it's ironic when I said, here are you, this Marine in battle, not the John Wayne figure, not the swaggering macho, whoever it might be, Errol Flynn in our time.
Yeah.
Not Clint Eastwood. Rather, Eugene B. Sledge, teacher of biology, bird lover, bird watcher, or a specialist in ornithology. And you don't believe in violence, we're talking about war.
I don't like violence, but there are times when you can't help it. I mean, because like you say, in World War II, we had no choice. But I don't really watch TV very much. That's my personal choice. I have a lot of reading I like to do and want to do, and I like to be outdoors. But I don't even like to watch television shows. For instance, these things where someone is coming after someone who's unarmed and they're helpless, and all these to do with these psychopathic killers they have on TV today, and all these, and then they say this violence doesn't affect children and so forth, and then they turn right around and say, well, we can teach children with television. It kind of confuses me. But the point is that it bothers me to see just on a film somebody threatening the life of somebody else. Or maybe what really bothers me more is I hate to see anything afraid, because I was afraid so much for so long, and what it, in a sense, all boiled down to, I guess, was I got so tired of being scared. You just got so tired of being scared, and day after day, you literally knew that the only thing you had was that particular moment you were living right then. And I've seen guys go through 3 campaigns and get killed at Okinawa the last day. Just the tragedy of it. And so you had to develop an attitude where you might say in a sense lived for the moment. And I suppose the effect it had on me after the war was it just bothers me to see anybody mistreat anything or anybody. But by the same token, there are certain things that have to be done, and I think this was one thing about our training that made it so effective. And from what I saw of Army outfits during the war, the guys were like we were, but they were trained differently. And I think our training was very, very realistic, and it comes across to the public and to the movies as sometimes being brutal. Well, now maybe there were cases where there were excesses after the war. Incidentally, I don't know of a case in World War II where a drill instructor was brutal to recruits. My drill instructor made us do things that might have sounded brutal, but when you came down to brass tacks, he knew what we were going to face. And incidentally, he later came over as a replacement and was at Okinawa. I didn't know it until after the war, and was a machine gun sergeant, was wounded at Okinawa. But the point is, for people to get out and face what we had to face and survive, you can't train them like Boy Scouts. And this, to some people, is ironic. They feel that how could you endorse Marine Corps training and so forth? And the way it is, and yet you don't like violence, the military, and all that. Well, if you're going to live in a free country, you better not criticize the military. That is, unless the military carries on excesses and so forth and interferes with civilian freedoms and so forth, which in our country, fortunately, it doesn't. But and what I'm talking about is World War II. That's and I'm not making any generalization. I'm just.
You say you live with fear all the time. Fear.
Just constant.
Yeah.
And of course, there were different intensities
Yes,
of
of course.
different intensities, but and then too, the thing that bothered me so much, ultimately even worse than fear itself, was, of course, FDR said all we have to fear is fear itself, but I got so tired of seeing guys get hit and get banged up. And because the more of that you saw, then the more you felt like you could take it out on the Japanese. And then the feeling grew and grew, and I guess you became more and more calloused,
Yeah. You never met a Jap. Did you ever, during that campaign, get to know one?
Oh, no. Well, one of the few we captured at Okinawa could speak English, and he was a Yale graduate, and he was a lieutenant, and he surrendered, he and one of his sergeants, and they surrendered and came into us when this road cut right down at the tip end of the island. The battle was almost over, and the Japanese snipers started firing at them, to try to kill them, because the snipers knew they had surrendered. And my platoon sergeant said, "Get behind this rock, you crazy son of a bitch. What are you going to do, stand out there and get yourself killed?" And this Japanese lieutenant smiled and said, "Yes, sir," and came and got down behind this rock by us. But we never said anything to him, and he spoke perfect English. But I've heard of people, who've talked to Japanese veterans and so forth. I never have myself. And I must be perfectly honest with you, I still have a great deal of feeling about it.
I don't hear about that.
Well, I mean, I don't mean present day Japan.
No.
I don't mean, but I mean the way they fought, and I don't think you can erase this from the record. The Germans are constantly getting thrown into their face the horrors of Nazism, but who reminds Japan of what they did to China, or what they did to the Filipinos? And periodically Americans will remember Bataan and this kind of thing, but no, it was, and I think it was because of their Bushido code that apparently they feel, I don't know much about Japanese culture, but they feel that you can reach perfection in various ways by having various things, so flower arranging and this, that, and the other, music and so forth, to reach a very fine art. And the art of the warrior was
again irony.
Bushido.
Again irony, flower arranging and Bushido.
Yeah. Well, incidentally, we very often got pictures off of dead Japanese, photographs that they had taken in China or somewhere like this, because the Japanese we fought at Peleliu had fought in Manchuria, and then had been sent down into the Pacific, and it was a real veteran outfit, and they. It always struck me as ironic. Here would be this Japanese soldier sitting down in a chair in a typical 1940s period photographic studio with maybe a screen behind him or something, and a table with a little flower arrangement on the table. It always struck me as so strange. Here's this guy, and very often they would be holding their rifle. I remember one of the guys got a picture of one that had a knee mortar, a small grenade launcher type mortar, and yet there was always usually that little table with a little vase of flowers. You see.
By the way, the set here, you wouldn't buy one of these, would you? This is Sony.
Well, I don't know
Tell
that.
Tell me the truth.
No, I don't think I'd have any objection to that. A lot of people condemn the Japanese today and say I wouldn't buy Japanese products, but those people are on the ball, and they to me, they have transferred their same dedication, and it was called fanaticism in World War II, to production.
That's interesting.
Today, I mean, that's the way it seems to me.
Yeah.
And people curse the Japanese automakers, and because they say, well, they've almost run Detroit out of business and all this. Well, but I mean, they saw the need for an economy car with low maintenance and so forth. I don't have a Japanese car. I would rather buy American products. My car is an American automobile, except for an ancient Volkswagen I have. But I think most Americans don't understand the Japanese. They don't understand them now, and they didn't understand them then. You see what I mean? And
see, this is marvelous.
Well,
you know, I've got an hour here.
Oh, well,
no,
that's...
but it's no. I'm just thinking. Any thought? Just general, because I like your reflections very much. So you saw the kids yourself too, I suppose. But you saw these young boys. You were 19. The other kids are 19, 20. So you saw innocent kids, a little scared, but not letting their bodies down. You saw them day after day change.
That's right, yeah. I think the authors like to refer to them as seasoned veterans or some humbug like that, but I guess we all became sort of calloused and hardened, and but to me, as a biologist and as a scientist, this life is really a miracle. I mean, when I minored in biochemistry when I got my PhD, and it was one of the most fascinating areas that I ever studied, and I came pretty close to going into cancer research, but the primary reason I didn't was because I liked being outdoors, and as a biologist here on the campus, I can, have ornithology, I can go out, get out on field trips and things like this. But when you really get down to it, the people who are really specialists in these areas will tell you that life is, even at the level of an amoeba or something like that, is an absolute miracle. I mean, you can put all the chemical ingredients together, and yet it's not alive. And yet we were out there, human beings, the most highly developed mentally, the most highly developed form of life that we know of, certainly on Earth, and fighting each other like a bunch of savages. I mean, and I'm literally, I've talked to veterans of other areas, and they rarely ran into as much of this knockdown, drag-out, kind of just fight to the bitter end the way we did. Now, because there were different kinds of fear and different kinds of stress, and what the movies love to emphasize is the hand-to-hand combat business. Well, of course, you had to be trained in that to give you self-confidence, because if you didn't, the Japanese, I don't know whether you'd say they loved it, but they sure went in for it, particularly at night, and they'd slip up real close and then jump in. And if you didn't know how to protect yourself with a K-bar, if you couldn't shoot one of them first, you were in bad shape. But to me, we all had different kinds of manias, I guess, about the thing we were most afraid of. To me, the most horrible thing was to be under shell fire, because it was this absolute...
Under shell fire.
Yeah, absolute feeling of helplessness, and this thing comes... And at Okinawa, the Japanese had 150 millimeter howitzers, and of course they have bigger calibers today, but in the world, and the military had bigger ones then, but this dang thing comes roaring in there. It sounds like a train or a jet aircraft coming, and all of a sudden it goes off with this terrific crash. The ground shakes, and all this shrapnel goes ripping and tearing through the air, and oh God, I remember one afternoon real late at Okinawa, we were on this half-moon hill there, and there was a foxhole next to me with two boys in it, and the one next to that had three in it. And it was fairly quiet, and we heard this shell come screeching over, and you could, like I say, I was a veteran of Peleliu and been through a good bit of Okinawa by then, and you could tell what caliber it was and where it was coming from. You had to learn that quick. We could tell this was coming from behind the lines, and to be shelled by just anonymous incoming artillery shells was one thing, but this obviously was from probably a 70mm mountain gun, as the Japanese called it, and it was aimed to fire. The crew was apparently firing it at us, just like a rifle. Well, the shell went off past us and exploded near some knocked out American tanks. And somebody said, "My God Almighty, that's a 70mm mountain gun. He's shooting that thing like a damn rifle." Boy. The next shell studs came right over. The guy 2 foxholes down from me was sitting on the side of his foxhole drinking a cup of hot chocolate out of it. You know, a little heated with a steno tablet, and it was C-ration chocolate. That shell must have passed no more than a foot over my head. And I was observing for the mortar, so I was in the foxhole by myself. And the thing went over me and went and exploded in that foxhole 2 holes down. Now, that must have been, I guess, maybe 20 yards away, or maybe a little more. Maybe it was more than that, maybe 30. But the point is, I saw this guy go up into the air. The other 2 didn't even move. The 2 kids next to me just fell over. You know, they were both sitting up in the foxhole, and they just fell over backwards. And the immediate thing I had to do, because this was what you had to do, I had to go see if I could help. And believe me, if I ever didn't want to get out of a foxhole, it was then, because I figured he was going to fire again. And the concussion was terrific. And I got up and started over there, and I took about 2 steps, and I just knew that gun was going to fire again. I took about 2 steps, and one of the 2 officers left in the company. We had 7 originally, but we only had about 2 by then. Said, "Sledgehammer, get back on the mortar," which was about 25, 30 yards behind the front lines. "Get back on the mortar, because we're going to have to send a patrol out to try to find that gun, that Jap gun, and you're a more experienced gunner than the kid on the mortar now." So I just spun around, and I mean, I ran down that ridge and across that mud like a duck running on the water. I wanted to get out of there so bad. But I just, you know, I mean, I knew all 3 of the guys in the second foxhole over. The 2 next to me were replacements. But to make a long story short.
No, go ahead.
The 2 in the hole next to me were dead. They were killed instantly. The one who was blown into the air was the only one who survived. And would you believe that his name is Bill Layden, Leyden, and he lives in New York. And would you believe that today Bill gets partial disability for wounds he received at Nicosebus, at Peleliu, and at Okinawa, shrapnel wounds. But his record doesn't say anything about concussion. He has seizures where he can't, you know, epileptic, he can't drive an automobile. But they say, well, you don't have concussion on your record, so you can't get this. But my God, he was blown up. He was the one that went up into the air.
And he gets probably very little, I imagine.
Oh yeah, probably. He's never told me. He's very proud. I see him at the Marine, any of the reunions.
They pay, you know, absolutely.
But there's something. They say, "Hey, just another guy trying to be a freeloader." You see, and yes, Bill got blown up into the air.
So he doesn't get paid for that.
No,
he was blown up and.
Now, if you don't call that concussion, my God, what is concussion? And you see the people back in the medical company. We called them medical companies. They were Navy medical companies that handled our wounded. They were too busy trying to save lives to fill out records on exactly what, you know, what happened to them. But anyway, one of the 2 guys in the hole with Bill, one of them, his leg was severed at the ankle, and I was back on the mortar, and they brought the stretcher cases by, and Bill was just groaning. He was unconscious, and this other guy was from Washington. He'd been a lumberjack. He must have been no more than 21, but he had been a lumberjack, you know. And I used to tell him always how good I thought Christmas trees smelled, you know. He said, "Oh, Sledgehammer, we got trees out there that smell that good." And he'd talk about how good those trees smelled, you know, and those spruce forests and all. And we were all muddy, and he had this stump of this leg all wrapped in this bloody bandage, and he said, "Sledgehammer, you think I'm going to lose my leg?" And my God, there was his boondocker, which was his field shoe, you know, up on the stretcher with him with this stump of the ankle sticking out of it. And if you don't think that didn't just about tear my guts out. You know, I thought, what in the hell are we doing? Trying to this nasty, stinking, muddy ridge, and what's this all about? You know what I mean? And then the next guy that came by was a kid who he wanted to see. Immediately the corpsman gave the guys morphine, and either from shock or from the effects of the morphine, they rarely were vocal. How wounded were. Well, you read in history about the cries of the wounded and all. And you know, I'd often thought, well, you know, so what? What does that mean? Well, we had heard some Jap wounded at Peleliu, and frankly, it never bothered me. Well, the guy said, "Let the bastard, let him yell." You know, I mean that was the attitude. But anyway, this guy came by, and he was just crying and moaning and talking about that it hurt so bad. And we said to the corpsman, you know, said, "Doc, give him something, you know. My God, the poor kid at Louis was his name." He said, "Louis, just about, he's in agony." And the corpsman said, "He's in shock. His veins have collapsed. I can't give him anything else." And the kid was saying, I'll never forget, it was just raining, you know, and shells had started coming in, and stretcher teams were trying to get him out through this damn, practically knee-deep mud. And this boy who asked me about his leg, they didn't get any more than 20 feet on past me. Then the stretcher team stopped. They were Marines, you know, and they looked at each other and just put the stretcher down and then covered the guy with his poncho. And he died, you know, just right after he spoke to me. And this other kid that was moaning and groaning so much, he said, "Oh, Jesus Christ, it hurts so bad, make it stop hurting." And, you know, he'd been no more than 20 feet from me, you know, and we asked the corpsman, you know, "Why can't you stop it?" And the corpsman said, "Because his veins have collapsed." Because this kid died in a few minutes, you know. And of all those, the two guys next to me and the three guys in the next hole, all of them died but Layton. And yet he can't get compensation for concussions. I wrote his senator from New York and asked him to please help, but I don't think they understand. You know, I mean, it's got to be on the record. They don't have concussion.
On the record. You know, something you say here, I've got it really. You spoke of a phrase in the book that wasted lives on a muddy slope. You're talking about the Japanese guy who died, you know, he fought, and the guys were shooting him, and one of the guys, "Let the poor bastard alone. He can't. But they wasted lives on a muddy slope. That could apply to both sides, couldn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then people talk about, you know, I saw a thing about Iwo Jima, a book about Iwo Jima, the most glorious amphibious operation in history. And I've, particularly since With the Old Breed has come out, I've had letters, real nice letters, from a lot of Iwo Jima veterans. And a lot of them have said that Iwo Jima was more similar to Peleliu than any other Pacific battle they ever read about.
Yeah, sure it was.
Peleliu was a smaller operation, but it was very similar, you know. And what was glorious about it?
Yeah.
You see, these words get applied to this stuff.
By the way, that's good. I think I might end with that. What was glorious about it? I think I'll end your profile with that. They say you're saying they were glorious battle. What was glorious about it? Yeah. I think I just ended with that, really. This is beautiful. What you give me is just what I want.
I hope it is. Oh, now don't you put me on.
No, I'm not. I wouldn't. I know exactly where it's going to fit. And I wouldn't come down to see you, would I? Because I can tell from the book, you know. See, because it's different. See, the added horror is what makes it different from the European, which is bad enough. But here.
Oh yeah.
And so the American plus the Japanese feeling being different than the German about war. Therefore, the American kid's feeling toward the Japanese was more hate than toward the young Germans like us.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I have I've heard of these. Well, I saw a TV short one time on something about Return to the River Kwai. They had some prisoners go back, and they wanted the American and English prisoners to go back and meet the former Japanese captors on this bridge, you know. Then some American wouldn't go, and this newsman said, "Well, why?" And the guy said, "You just don't understand." Now, there are people who will tell you now that they have no hatred, they felt no hatred, and so forth. I don't feel active hatred toward the Japanese, because I think hatred just eats you up inside.
Right.
But I think we all tend to mellow. But I think you have to be realistic about the way it really was. And that's one thing I think that many people don't understand, that there was bitter hatred, and that's just the way it was. It was a reality. And to me, the only things, as I said in the book, that had any merit, of course we had to win the war. I mean, World War II, any fool knows that it was either win all or lose all. I mean, there was no choice there. But the thing that will always stand out in my mind is my buddies and that dedication to each other. And I think that they were extraordinary. And I think it was because they believed in this country, basically. Well, I don't think they would. I think it was the way we had been educated, the way we'd been disciplined at home, and we had the ability to stick to it till it was over. Because it had been awful easy to just bow out of it and say, I've had enough, I can't take it anymore. But you couldn't do that.
As we're talking now, something you said last night, and you can talk as you're driving, this won't disturb you, will it?
No.
You said how the book came to be, the diary, and you mentioned the New Testament. I was quite moved. Why don't you just reflect on it, just as you're driving?
Well, my parents had both taught me the value of history, and the fact that both of my grandfathers had been in the Confederate Army, and we had many letters from one of them who had been an infantry captain and was captured, and he didn't talk anything about the glory of war. All he talked about was how terrible it was and the reality of it. And he was finally released from prison, and because of his health, and he came home and became, although he was a lawyer, he became a minister after the Civil War, and Methodist minister. And then the other grandfather, though, who was a surgeon, we didn't have any letters remaining from him. And so when I got overseas, I decided that it was really the third day at Peleliu, and amidst all that confusion and violence and fear, I realized that this was a momentous event, and I was just one little tiny wheel in the cog, or cog in the wheel, excuse me, and that I should write all this down if I survived, for my family, so the family would know what it was really like. And also, Studs, there were many basic questions about military history and so forth that I had never found the answers to in all the reams of material I had read as a boy about the Civil War and World War I, and that is how the troops felt, what they did, what it was really like to a man in fierce combat. We knew what the general said, what he thought, what he ate, and all this, but you know, the guys out there doing the killing and trying to survive. So those were some of the questions that I wanted to be able to put on paper. Well, we were read a division order before we embarked from Pavuvu in the Russell Islands, where our base camp was, that there would be no diaries. The troops would not keep diaries. And this was because in the event that you got killed and your body couldn't be recovered, even though in the Marines we always made every effort to recover all the dead, in the event that any diary might get captured for the Japs, they might get information from it. So I couldn't keep a diary, so I kept little notes on slips of paper when things quieted down and nobody was really watching. And sometimes this would be a period of days before I could do it. I would write down these notes and keep them on slips of paper and keep them in my little New Testament. And I had a little Gideon's New Testament the type that they passed out to the troops in World War II. And I kept it in a little rubber bag that I got off a dead Jap, the kind they carried their personal papers in, photographs and so forth. And I kept my Testament in that, the New Testament, because it was either wet with sweat or wet with rain all the time. But anyway, I made all these notes, see, of things that I wanted to remember, various details, and things like casualties and things like that at the level of our company, which was in in combat, that's all you knew was what was going on in your company. Because you couldn't see or know what was going on anywhere else, and you really didn't care much. You were just trying to survive with your buddies and all. But so the casualty figures I had to commit to memory, because I knew if I should ever get caught with these notes, I'd be severely disciplined for disobeying orders in the first place. And with casualty figures written down, they would really lower the boom on me, which is understandable. I mean, we'd been told not to do that. But in any event, I did it, and that's how I was able to keep all the details that I kept that were never recorded anywhere else. And then after the war was over, I sat right down as soon as I got home and wrote out a long outline of the whole, the whole episode, and of both campaigns, training, because I think the training was so important, because that's what enabled us to do what we did in combat and withstand the severe stress that was just, almost beyond human endurance. And it was the training, to me, that was so extremely important. And anyway, I made this outline, and then subsequently got material from the Marine Corps Historical Section. And
so you kept it in the New Testament?
Yeah.
Inserted in the pages of it?
Yeah, inserted in the pages, and then on the flyleaf of the New Testament, I wrote certain things down too, and in the back of it, I wrote certain things down that I figured they wouldn't, if I was seen with that, there wouldn't be any.
Did you refer to the New Testament often on occasion?
Oh yeah, because anytime we made an attack, I recited the 23rd Psalm.
Did you?
Yeah, all the time.
But the Lord is my shepherd?
Yeah, right, and that was I got a great deal of, you might say, comfort from that, but on the battlefield, every man is basically, you might say, alone with God, or whatever God he believes in, or if he doesn't believe in God, he's alone with chance, I guess. And as old Snafu Shelton says, that I don't know what it was that brought us through, because I was doing a hell of a lot of cussing, and Sledge was doing a hell of a lot of praying, and one of the other of them brought us through.
Who said that?
Snafu Shelton.
Snafu Shelton.
Yeah, Merrill Shelton.
Yeah, that's a good phrase.
Yeah.
Cussing, these are the hell.
Oh yeah.
So you always recited what you recited to yourself the 23rd Psalm.
Yeah, right, and
before every attack.
Yeah, and of course a lot of times during the shelling, because that was so, you felt so utterly helpless, and I still have that little New Testament. I still read it.
I'll be darned, yeah.
But and at the First Division reunions, the gunny sergeant who survived, Hank Boys, and the only officer in the company, Stumpy Stanley, who became the company commander at Pelledu after the Captain Haldane was killed. Stumpy Stanley and Hank Boys always say, Sledgehammer, we're so damn glad we never knew you were keeping those notes in that New Testament. We just figured you were awfully pious. With all that always had that little New Testament out every time we stopped anywhere.
He figured you were what? You were?
Pious.
Oh, you're awfully pious.
Yeah.
Oh, that was it. Yeah.
Because part of the time I was reading the New Testament, part of the time I was jotting notes down.
Well, were you considered pretty much the pious one of the group?
No, not more so than anybody else.
Yeah.
Some of the guys were very, but anyway, what I was going to say was Stumpy and Hank Boys always say, we're so glad we didn't know you were keeping those notes, we'd have made you throw them away.
Yeah.
We'd have had to tear them up. But some of the guys were very religious, but some of them after a while got so fatalistic they just apparently figured, it's just nothing but dumb chance anyway as to whether you survive.
That's interesting. Chance.
Yeah, oh yeah. Hey,
chance.
There's have you ever read the poem by Wilfred Owen of World War I?
Oh, he's a great poet.
Insensibility?
No.
I'll have to send you a copy of that, because the basic theme of insensibility is the man who can go through combat and not be bothered by the deaths of others and escape chance's strange arithmetic, as he calls it, and the doubt and tease of shelling. And the man who can go through combat and not be bothered by other men's deaths and has developed an insensibility, not through any intent, but through what war has done to him, he's the fortunate one. Because then he doesn't suffer as much as the one who is sensitive to the death and suffering of his comrades. But then Owen also says in the poem that you can't compare this man to the old man at home who's never gone anywhere and who's never done anything, and he's just calloused and hardened to everything and has no compassion. They're two totally different things.
Yeah.
That the young combat man out there on the front line develops insensitivity because this is the only way he can cope with it mentally. And he hates to see his buddies killed, and
that's a good. It's called insensitivity or insensibility.
Insensibility.
Insensibility. Well, Owen.
Wilfred Owen. I've got a Xerox in my briefcase. I'll send you a
Wilfred
Xerox.
Owen and
Siegfried Sassoon.
Rupert Brooke.
You know,
Siegfried Sassoon.
You mentioned Fussell, Fussell.
Oh, yeah, Fussell.
Fussell, yeah. Well,
he wrote this.
Class. But, you know, he also wrote a marvelous book.
The Great War.
The Great War in Modern Memory. And
yeah.
I wrote him in
You like that book?
Oh, well,
I didn't read
he did such a fantastic job. And he brought, there were so many parallels between what he was an infantryman in World War II in Europe. And then he wrote this book about World War I. And there's so many parallels between what Fussell talks about in World War I and what we experienced on the front lines in the Pacific in World War II. I mean, even with all the technology, the basic similarity. But he wrote me that he has a book, I think, that is just out. It was supposed to come out October.
Called Class?
No, not only Class, but one called The Long Journey of Siegfried Sassoon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he told me in the letter that he has photographs in it, and that, you see, Sassoon wrote Memoirs of an Infantry Officer, and then he wrote those wonderful war poems about World War I, and then, you know, he came back home on leave and got together with Bertrand Russell and tried to get involved in getting the war stopped.
Yeah.
You may be aware of that.
Sassoon did.
Yeah, so, but he was a highly respected infantry officer, and Robert, he thought he would be disciplined for it, and he would, you know, this is the way he would make his point. He had been decorated in France before he did this, before he came back on leave.
Yeah, this guy had the credentials.
Yeah, right, and he was a good friend of Wilfred Owens and also of Robert Graves, and who later wrote so much in mythology. And Robert Graves went to the medical people and told them, look, Sassoon is not breaking regulations. He just has simply got neurasthenia, they called it then, or no, it's combat fatigue. And so Sassoon was not disciplined, and he explains all this in his semi-biographical Memoirs of an Infantry Officer, and said that his attempt to, you know, at pacifism and to get the war stopped was apparently not going to lead anywhere. So he thought the only thing for him to do was to go back out, as they called it in England, to be with the troops and try to do as much as he could to lead the troops that he had led earlier in the war. And so he went back out into combat and was later severely wounded and sent back to England, and of course wrote all those fine poems. But Fussell has Sassoon had a semi-biographical character he called George Shaston, and this was really himself. And so apparently Fussell has put a lot of this together. He called it the Long Journey of Siegfried Sassoon, because one of the books was in the semi-biographical series was called Shaston's Journey, and because he's talking about himself, you know.
Well, distribution. K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Regiment,
right.
of the 1st Marine Division.
That's right.